Among the treasures, more fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Fox's Trey Yingst is in Jerusalem with the latest.
For decades, the Dead Sea Scrolls have guarded the secrets of the ancient world, hidden in desert caves and preserved against time. They're fragile fragments, carrying echoes of faith, prophecy, and law. But now, everything has changed. Google's quantum AI, a powerful leap in quantum computing and artificial intelligence, was asked to decode these sacred manuscripts by analyzing ink patterns, handwriting strokes, parchment fibers, and microscopic details no human scholar could ever fully measure. What it uncovered is shaking biblical scholarship and rewriting the timeline of some of history's oldest texts.
7 decades since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, around 80 new fragments of the ancient texts have been revealed to the public.
What happens when advanced AI begins to reinterpret humanity's most sacred ancient texts? Join us as we uncover what was discovered. The AI breakthrough. Something unexpected happened when advanced computer technology was turned towards some of the oldest religious writings ever found. Researchers fed high-resolution images of the ancient manuscripts known as the Dead Sea Scrolls into a specially designed artificial intelligence system called Enoch. The goal was simple but bold: to test whether machine learning could estimate the age of the handwriting more precisely than human experts alone. For decades, historians relied on two main tools. First, they compared handwriting styles by eye, a method known as paleography. Second, they used radiocarbon dating to measure the age of the parchment. Both methods are careful and scientific, but both also come with limits. Human judgment can vary. Carbon testing gives ranges, not exact birthdays. So scholars wondered whether a computer trained to detect tiny patterns could narrow those ranges and offer fresh insight. Enoch was built by academic researchers, not by a secret tech lab, and not by a quantum supercomputer decoding hidden prophecies. It does not read meanings or uncover secret messages. Instead, it studies shapes. It examines curves of letters, the pressure behind strokes, spacing between lines, and the rhythm of the writing. These details are so small that the human eye may miss them, but a machine can measure them in microscopic detail. The system was trained using manuscripts whose ages were already estimated through radiocarbon testing. By learning how handwriting changed over time, the program developed a model that could predict when an undated fragment might have been written. After analyzing several scroll fragments, the results suggested that some of them may be older than scholars previously thought. This finding is important. The scrolls were discovered between 1947 and 1956 in caves near the Dead Sea. They include some of the earliest known copies of texts from the Hebrew Bible, along with community writings from a Jewish group that lived more than 2,000 years ago. Many of these documents were dated between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE. If certain fragments now appear to belong closer to the earlier end of that timeline, it gently shifts how historians understand the development of religious thought in that era. It does not mean a new gospel was found. It does not mean predictions about the future were decoded. It does not mean ancient secrets were unlocked by a machine. What it does suggest is that some writings may have circulated earlier than previously assumed. That small adjustment matters to scholars who study how ideas traveled, how scribes copied texts, and how communities preserved their beliefs. For viewers who saw dramatic headlines about quantum computers uncovering terrifying discoveries, the reality is quieter, but still powerful. The technology involved is artificial intelligence trained to analyze handwriting patterns, not a mystical system reading divine code. There is no confirmed involvement of Google quantum AI in translating or decoding hidden meanings from the scrolls. The research focuses on dating, not prophecy. Still, something about this moment feels big. For years, experts leaned on trained eyes and careful chemical testing. Now a machine can scan thousands of pen strokes in seconds and detect patterns invisible to humans. It does not replace historians, but it adds another layer of analysis. That partnership between human knowledge and machine precision signals a new chapter in archaeology. Imagine holding a fragile fragment of parchment written more than 2,000 years ago. Imagine wondering exactly when the hand that formed those letters moved across the surface. Now imagine a program that can measure each tiny curve and compare it to thousands of others, offering a more refined estimate of its age. That is what happened here. The past was not rewritten, but it was examined through a sharper lens. And here is where things grow even more interesting. If artificial intelligence can help redate sacred writings that shaped history, what does that say about the way we understand ancient knowledge? What exactly are these scrolls, and why have they fascinated scholars and believers for generations? To truly grasp why this technological breakthrough matters, we must step back and explore what these ancient manuscripts are, where they came from, and why their survival is nothing short of extraordinary. What the Dead Sea Scrolls actually are. Long before computers examined faded ink strokes, a quiet discovery in the desert changed history forever. In the late 1940s, a young shepherd searching for a lost animal threw a stone into a cave and heard the sound of breaking pottery. That simple moment led to one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Hidden inside jars were ancient manuscripts that had slept in darkness for nearly 2,000 years. These writings would later be known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Between 1947 and 1956, explorers uncovered thousands of fragments in caves near the Dead Sea. Some pieces were small, no bigger than a coin. Others were long sheets of parchment. When scholars carefully pieced them together, they realized they were holding copies of sacred texts, community rules, prayers, and commentaries written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and a little Greek. What made this discovery so powerful was not just the age of the material, but what it contained. Among the fragments were some of the oldest known copies of books that appear in the Hebrew Bible. Before this discovery, the earliest complete manuscripts of these texts were from the Middle Ages, written about 1,000 years after the time of Jesus. Suddenly, historians had documents that were far older, dating roughly from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. This pushed the physical evidence of biblical texts much closer to the time when they were first composed. It allowed scholars to compare how the wording changed, how carefully scribes copied the texts, and how religious ideas developed over time. Many were surprised to see how consistent some passages remained across centuries. Others noticed small variations that showed how living communities interacted with their sacred writings. Most researchers believe the scrolls were linked to a Jewish group living near the desert settlement of Qumran. This community appears to have followed strict religious practices. Their writings describe rules for daily life, rituals, discipline, and expectations about the future. They seem to believe they were living in a critical moment of history, waiting for divine intervention and the arrival of a new age. It is important to understand that the scrolls are not a single book. They are a library. They include copies of biblical texts like Isaiah and Deuteronomy, as well as unique writings that do not appear in the Bible. Some texts explain laws. Others describe visions, prayers, or community guidelines. Together, they paint a picture of Jewish life and belief during a period filled with political tension and cultural change. The scrolls survived because they were hidden. The dry desert air preserved the fragile parchment. If they had remained in a damp climate, they would have turned to dust. Their survival feels almost miraculous, but it was also accidental. They were placed in caves and left undisturbed for centuries until chance brought them back into the light. Over time, teams of scholars worked patiently to clean, photograph, and assemble the fragments. It was like solving a giant puzzle with thousands of missing pieces. Each fragment had to be matched by handwriting style, ink color, and texture. The work took decades and continues even today. Because these manuscripts are so old and so important, every small discovery about them carries weight. Changing a date by even 50 years can influence how historians understand the timeline of religious development. That is why the recent involvement of artificial intelligence feels so significant. The scrolls are not just old documents. They are windows into a world that shaped modern faith and culture. Now that we understand what these writings are and why they matter, a deeper question begins to rise. If scholars have studied them carefully for more than 70 years, why was there still uncertainty about their exact age? What limits did traditional methods face that made researchers turn to machine learning for help? To answer that, we need to look closely at how experts have been dating these scrolls all along, and why even careful science sometimes leaves room for doubt. The AI system Enoch. For many years, experts depended on two trusted paths to estimate when these ancient writings were created. The first path relied on trained human eyes. Specialists in ancient handwriting carefully compared the shapes of letters, the flow of ink, and the way words were spaced. Over time, scribal styles change, just like modern handwriting changes from one generation to another. By studying dated samples from different periods, scholars learned to recognize patterns. If a letter curved a certain way, or if lines were arranged in a familiar rhythm, they could place the writing within a general time frame. This method, called paleography, has guided research on the Dead Sea Scrolls for decades. The second path used science in a more physical sense. Radiocarbon dating measures the decay of carbon-14 in organic material like parchment. Because the scrolls were written on animal skins, scientists could test tiny samples to estimate when the material came from a living creature. The result does not give a single year. Instead, it provides a range of probable dates, sometimes spanning several decades. Even with careful testing, there is always a margin of uncertainty. Both methods are serious and reliable, but neither is perfect. Handwriting analysis depends on expert judgment. Two scholars may look at the same letter and interpret it slightly differently. Radiocarbon testing can be influenced by contamination or limited sample size. In some cases, only a small piece of parchment can be tested to avoid damaging the artifact. This means the date reflects when the animal's skin was prepared, not necessarily when the text was written. The gap between those two moments could be short, but it could also be longer. As researchers continued studying the scrolls, they realized that many fragments had been dated mainly through comparison rather than direct testing. Over time, certain assumptions became widely accepted. A fragment might be labeled as belonging to the 1st century BCE because its script resembled other texts from that period. Yet, resemblance does not always equal exact timing. Small stylistic shifts can be hard to measure precisely with the human eye. This growing awareness opened the door to a new idea. What if a machine could measure handwriting features in ways that no person could? What if thousands of tiny details could be analyzed together, rather than relying on general visual impressions? That question led to the development of an artificial intelligence system known as Enoch. Enoch was trained using scroll fragments that already had radiocarbon estimates. By feeding the system high-quality images and confirmed date ranges, researchers allowed it to learn how specific writing traits correlated with certain periods. Instead of simply noticing that a letter looked old or new, the program measured exact curves, stroke thickness, spacing patterns, and structural geometry. It transformed visual art into measurable data. When the system examined additional fragments, its predictions sometimes suggested earlier time frames than the commonly accepted scholarly dates. These were not wild changes stretching centuries back. They were careful adjustments within realistic historical boundaries. Yet even a shift of a few decades can influence how scholars map the development of religious literature. It is important to remember that artificial intelligence does not replace the earlier methods. The predictions still rely on radiocarbon data as a foundation. The machine's estimates are compared with scientific testing and expert review. Rather than overthrowing traditional scholarship, the system adds another layer of precision. It helps narrow broad ranges and test long-held assumptions. The real turning point is not that a computer discovered hidden messages. The deeper shift lies in how technology is reshaping historical research. For generations, dating ancient manuscripts depended largely on human interpretation and limited lab results. Now, advanced algorithms can process thousands of microscopic features in moments, offering a more detailed statistical picture. This raises a thoughtful question. If new tools can refine the timeline of sacred texts, how might that influence our understanding of the communities who wrote and preserved them? Could earlier dates suggest that certain ideas were spreading sooner than believed? And what might that mean for the broader story of ancient belief systems? As these questions begin to unfold, the focus moves from methods to meaning. If the dates adjust even slightly, what are the wider consequences for history, faith, and cultural memory? The next step is to explore why these revised timelines matter more than they first appear, and how even small changes in dating can ripple through centuries of interpretation. Why earlier dates matter more than you think. When the adjusted dates began to surface, the changes did not explode like a bombshell, but they quietly shifted the ground beneath long-standing timelines. If certain manuscripts are even a few decades older than once believed, that small movement carries weight. History is like a chain, and when one link moves, the others feel it. If some scroll fragments truly belong closer to the 3rd century BCE rather than later periods, it suggests that parts of the Hebrew Bible were being copied and circulated earlier than scholars had assumed. That matters because it brings surviving copies nearer to the time when those texts were first composed. The shorter the gap between original writing and surviving copy, the clearer the window into the ancient world becomes. Earlier dating also reshapes how historians view scribal culture. Scribes were not just copyists, they were guardians of tradition. They preserved laws, poetry, prophecy, and community identity. If these scribes were active sooner, it may mean organized religious communities were already more structured and text-focused than previously thought. It hints that sacred writings were central earlier in Jewish society's development. There is also the question of consistency. One reason the Dead Sea Scrolls captured global attention is that they allowed comparison between ancient copies and later medieval manuscripts. Many passages remained remarkably stable over centuries. If AI-assisted analysis shows that some fragments are older, then that stability stretches back even further in time. That strengthens confidence in the careful transmission of these texts. At the same time, small variations between manuscripts become even more interesting. Minor wording differences can reveal how communities interpreted their beliefs. If those variations appear earlier than expected, it suggests theological discussion and diversity were already active at an early stage. That does not weaken faith traditions. Instead, it paints a richer picture of living communities engaging deeply with their scriptures. Another ripple effect touches the historical setting of the Second Temple period. This era was filled with political tension, foreign rule, and religious debate. If scrolls once thought to belong to a later phase are now placed earlier, historians may reconsider when certain ideas about law, purity, or future hope first emerged. The timeline of intellectual development becomes slightly more compressed. It is important to keep perspective. These shifts are measured in decades, not centuries. No major doctrine has been overturned. No hidden chapter has been inserted into religious history. The adjustments are careful and scholarly. Yet careful adjustments are how historical understanding evolves. Over time, small refinements build a clearer map of the past. What makes this moment feel powerful is not just the earlier dates themselves, but the method that produced them. Artificial intelligence did not replace historians, but it added a new lens. It challenged assumptions gently, asking whether patterns that looked familiar to human eyes might contain deeper, measurable signals. For some observers, this sparks excitement. For others, it brings unease. When technology enters sacred history, emotions can rise. People may wonder whether machines are beginning to interfere with spiritual heritage. In reality, the goal remains academic clarity. The scrolls are cultural treasures, and every method used to study them aims to preserve and understand them more accurately. Still, the emotional reaction is understandable. These manuscripts are not ordinary documents. They are tied to identity, belief, and centuries of tradition. Even small changes in dating can feel personal. When timelines shift, people ask, what else might shift? And this is where the conversation grows deeper. If artificial intelligence can refine our understanding of ancient scripture, what does that mean for the future of archaeology and religious studies? Could similar systems be applied to other fragile texts around the world? Are we entering a time when history will be re-examined with digital precision beyond anything imagined before? The implications stretch beyond one desert discovery. They point toward a broader transformation in how humanity studies its past. And as this transformation unfolds, one final layer remains to be explored: why the dramatic headlines describe the findings as terrifying, and what that reaction reveals about our relationship with technology and sacred history. The terrifying angle. When headlines began to spread across the internet, the language felt dramatic. Words like terrifying and shocking appeared beside references to artificial intelligence and ancient scripture. For many viewers, the combination sounded explosive. A powerful machine studying sacred writings that have shaped faith for thousands of years can easily stir strong emotions. But to understand why people reacted so intensely, We need to look beyond the noise and explore what is truly happening beneath the surface. The Dead Sea Scrolls are not ordinary historical papers. They are deeply connected to religious identity, tradition, and spiritual meaning. For believers, these writings represent continuity with the past. For historians, they are priceless evidence of how ancient communities thought, prayed, and organized their lives. When advanced technology enters that space, it can feel as if something sacred is being placed under a microscope. Artificial intelligence has already transformed medicine, finance, transportation, and communication. Now it is entering archaeology and religious studies. That shift alone can feel unsettling. Machines are no longer just tools that calculate numbers. They are analyzing art, language, handwriting, and cultural heritage. Even though the AI system used in this research simply measured writing patterns to estimate age, the idea of a computer studying holy texts can trigger deep emotional responses. Part of the fear comes from misunderstanding. Some online discussions suggested that a powerful tech company's quantum computer had decoded hidden secrets from the scrolls. There is no evidence that Google Quantum AI was involved in deciphering mystical messages from these manuscripts. The actual project focused on refining dates through handwriting analysis. It did not reveal new prophecies, predict world events, or uncover secret codes. Yet the word terrifying did not appear from nowhere. It reflects a broader anxiety about control and authority. For centuries, interpretation of sacred texts belonged to trained scholars, religious leaders, and academic institutions. Now, artificial intelligence can process information at a scale no human can match. That raises an important question. If machines can analyze ancient heritage with extreme precision, who guides the interpretation of the results? Another layer of discomfort comes from speed. Traditional scholarship moves slowly. Experts spend years comparing fragments, debating conclusions, and publishing careful studies. Artificial intelligence works rapidly. It can scan thousands of images and calculate statistical patterns in moments. That speed can create the impression that change is happening faster than society can absorb. There is also a psychological factor. Many people see technology as neutral when it improves daily convenience. But when it touches religion or identity, it feels personal. Sacred history is not just data. It is tied to family traditions, moral teachings, and cultural memory. When headlines suggest that artificial intelligence is revising timelines connected to scripture, emotions naturally rise. Still, it is important to return to the facts. The research did not overturn faith traditions. It did not challenge the existence of historical figures. It did not introduce new books into the biblical canon. It suggested that some manuscripts might be slightly older than previously believed. These adjustments help historians understand when certain texts were copied, not whether their message is true or false. In many ways, the real story is not frightening, but fascinating. It shows that human curiosity continues to evolve. Scholars are not replacing wisdom with machines. They are combining human expertise with computational tools. The AI system relied on radiocarbon dating results and expert input. It did not operate alone. It functioned as an assistant, not an authority. If anything, this partnership highlights how deeply humans value the past. Instead of leaving the scrolls untouched, researchers continue searching for more precise answers. They want to understand how ancient communities lived, how scribes preserved their writings, and how ideas developed across generations. Technology becomes a bridge connecting modern tools with ancient ink. The dramatic tone of some reports may reveal more about modern fears than about the scrolls themselves. We live in a time when artificial intelligence can generate images, write essays, and simulate voices. People worry about misinformation, job displacement, and loss of human control. When that same technology is linked to sacred history, it amplifies those concerns. But there is another way to see this moment. Rather than a threat, it may represent growth. Each generation develops new methods to study the past. Earlier scholars relied on handwritten copies and limited resources. Later generations introduced carbon dating and digital photography. Now artificial intelligence joins that list. The tools change, but the purpose remains the same: to understand history more clearly. So perhaps the unsettling feeling does not come from what was discovered, but from what it represents. We are watching the boundaries between ancient tradition and modern innovation meet in real time. It challenges us to think carefully about how we use technology, how we communicate findings, and how we balance emotion with evidence. And this brings us to a final reflection. If artificial intelligence can assist in re-examining one of the most significant manuscript discoveries in history, what might the future hold for other ancient texts around the world? How will scholars ensure that powerful tools remain guided by careful human judgment? The scrolls have survived for more than 2,000 years. Now, they stand at the center of a new chapter, where history and technology walk side by side, and where understanding depends not on fear, but on thoughtful exploration. What experts caution, and what we still don't know. As the dust settles and the excitement fades, what remains is something far more meaningful than dramatic headlines. What we are witnessing is not a battle between faith and machines, but a partnership between careful scholarship and modern tools. The story of the Dead Sea Scrolls is still unfolding, and artificial intelligence has simply become part of that unfolding journey. For more than 70 years, researchers have worked patiently to understand these fragile texts. They have cleaned fragments with steady hands, matched torn pieces like puzzle parts, and debated tiny details of handwriting late into the night. That dedication does not disappear because a computer enters the picture. Instead, it becomes even more valuable. Human expertise guides the questions. Technology helps refine the answers. Looking ahead, the role of artificial intelligence in archaeology will likely expand. There are thousands of ancient manuscripts around the world that remain partially damaged, faded, or difficult to date. AI systems trained to recognize writing patterns, ink composition, and material texture could assist scholars in organizing and analyzing large collections more efficiently. This does not mean machines will replace historians. It means historians may gain sharper instruments to explore the past. Imagine libraries filled with fragile documents that cannot be handled often because they risk crumbling. High-resolution imaging combined with machine learning could allow detailed study without constant physical contact. Patterns across centuries could be compared in seconds. Subtle shifts in style could be tracked across regions. Questions that once took decades to explore might be approached more systematically. At the same time, responsibility becomes even more important. Artificial intelligence depends on the data it receives. If the training material is limited or biased, the predictions may lean in one direction. That is why expert oversight remains essential. Scholars must interpret results carefully, compare them with physical testing, and remain open to revision. Technology can suggest possibilities. Thoughtful evaluation gives those possibilities meaning. Another key point is communication. When scientific updates are shared with the public, language matters. Words like terrifying may attract attention, but they can also distort understanding. The recent developments surrounding the scrolls were not about secret revelations. They were about improving chronological estimates. Clear explanation helps prevent confusion and builds trust between researchers and the wider community. This moment also invites a deeper reflection about how we relate to history. Ancient texts often carry emotional weight. They connect people to ancestors, traditions, and beliefs. When new tools examine those texts, reactions can be intense. But history has always evolved through improved methods. The invention of printing changed access to scripture. The discovery of carbon dating reshaped archaeology. Digital photography transformed manuscript preservation. Each advancement once felt unfamiliar, yet over time, it became normal. Artificial intelligence may follow that same path. Today, it feels powerful and mysterious. In the future, it may simply be another standard research instrument. The focus will remain on understanding human stories preserved in ink and parchment. The scrolls themselves remind us of endurance. Hidden for centuries near the shores of the Dead Sea, they survived heat, isolation, and time. Their preservation was not planned for the modern world, yet they reached it. Now they are being examined with tools unimaginable to the people who first wrote them. That contrast between ancient hands and modern algorithms is striking, but it is also beautiful. It shows how knowledge travels across generations. What happens next will depend on collaboration. Universities, laboratories, historians, and technologists will need to work together. Funding, transparency, and peer review will shape how responsibly these tools are applied. The goal should never be sensationalism. It should be clarity. In the end, the real power of this story lies not in fear, but in curiosity. Humanity continues to search for understanding. We look at fragile fragments and ask when they were written, who held them, and why they mattered. We build new instruments to help answer those questions. And with each careful step, we move a little closer to the people who lived thousands of years before us. The scrolls do not lose their meaning because technology studies them. If anything, their survival and continued examination prove how deeply they matter. Artificial intelligence is not rewriting sacred history. It is helping measure time with greater precision. And as this partnership between past and present continues, it invites us to stay engaged, to ask thoughtful questions, and to follow the journey wherever careful evidence leads. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.